The men said the tunnel had no end, but Corporal Henry Mercer had never believed in bottomless things. Everything had an edge, a wall, a turning point, every fear, every battle, every man. But the moment his boots crossed the jagged lip of the collapsed entrance on Saipan, he started to wonder if maybe this one time the stories were right. The darkness inhaled them whole. It wasn't quiet darkness, either, no. It breathed, shifted, whispered. The kind of black where the moment your flashlight skimmed the stone. Shadows recoiled like living things. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Keep your rifles high, Sergeant Talbot muttered behind him, voice low, gravelly, as if afraid to wake something sleeping. No sudden shots. We don't know how deep the bastards burrowed in. They all knew this wasn't a normal reconnaissance sweep. Japanese tunnel networks were infamous twisting labyrinths carved into volcanic rock, with hidden firing ports, blind corners, and chambers just big enough for ambush squads. Marines went missing in them, sometimes entire fire teams swallowed by the earth. Command wanted this one scouted because intelligence reported surviving enemy officers hiding somewhere inside, possibly coordinating nighttime counterattacks. But the terrain above was already hell. Inside, the earth felt worse. Hank kept his rifle up, flashlight strapped beneath the barrel, cutting a narrow cone through the suffocating dark. Around him, the air was heavy with damp soil and cordite ghosts of old firefights. Boots crunched over debris, shattered beam supports, rusted canteens, torn canvas packs once belonging to men who never walked out. "Feels like we're trespassing in a grave, PFC," Ronnie Havers whispered. "Shut it," Talbot said, but it didn't hold much bite. They all felt it. The tunnel widened unexpectedly, just enough for the men to fan slightly apart. A wall of old sandbags, half collapsed, emerged in the darkness. Hank swept his beam across it. Japanese characters were scrawled in faded paint warnings, maybe, or orders. He couldn't read them. Didn't want to. They crept on. Somewhere deeper in the mountain, a faint metallic clatter echoed. Hank froze. Talbot held up a fist stop. Everyone went still, breaths caught mid-chest. The clatter came again. Not random, not accidental, deliberate, metal on stone. Someone was in there. "Marines," Talbot breathed, eyes sharp. Safety off. The squad tightened their formation. Rifles raised. Shadows deepened. The tunnel swallowed their footsteps. Just a few weeks before Saipan, Hank had still been aboard the S. Halberd Star, a Liberty ship running supplies through the mid-Atlantic. He could still feel the deck's subtle sway beneath his boots, still hear the throb of its triple-expansion steam engine. Back. Then, his worst enemy had been the boredom of long, open water. He never imagined his life would swing from steel decks and ocean wind to dark volcanic tunnels halfway across the world. The night the Halberd Star survived a torpedo attack, a miracle people later called impossible, had been clear and cold. The moon was a dull, smudged smear behind thin clouds. Hank wasn't on watch. He had been sitting on a crate near the bow, writing in his journal, recording things he thought he'd want to remember someday. Things he thought he'd survive to read. Funny how war trains a man to write like he's already a ghost. The first torpedo struck at 1:47 a.m. The explosion punched the ship's hull with a force that seemed to rip the sea open. Hank was thrown onto the deck, his journal skittering away. Klaxons erupted as men poured from below, boots pounding, shouting orders and curses. "Starboard hit! Starboard hit!" But the strange thing, the unbelievable thing was that the ship didn't list. She didn't roll, didn't groan, or stagger the way a ship should after a direct hit. She settled, but only slightly, as if shrugging off a blow meant to kill her. The second torpedo never even made it. Something had malfunctioned. It detonated too early, sending a pillar of phosphorescent spray skyward. The German U-boat surfaced briefly just off port, its silhouette uncanny and sharp in the moonlight. Hank could see stunned faces staring back. The U-boat captain lifted his binoculars, hesitated, lowered them again. The Liberty ship should have been breaking apart. Instead, she held. Steel plates bent inward, yes, but not breached. A fluke of construction, experts said later. The right angle, the right weld, the right pressure distribution. A combination of accidents that made the halberd star nearly unkillable for one impossible minute in time. The Germans watched, disbelieving, while the halberd star's deck guns roared to life. The U-boat dove too late. One shell clipped its conning tower. Another hit the water just behind it, rattling the ocean with fire. Minutes later, sonar reported the sub withdrawing at full speed. Retreat wasn't common for U-boats, but that night, it happened. That night changed Hank. You don't walk away from a miracle without wondering if it came with a price. And now, deep in an island of stone and death, he wondered if this tunnel, this creeping, choking dark, was that price finally coming due. Back in the tunnel, the squad moved again. The clatter was closer now, too close. Hank's breath grew shallow. The walls felt tighter, the air thinner. He hated tunnels. He hated not having sky above him. He hated not knowing where danger waited. He wiped sweat from his brow. The beam from his flashlight trembled slightly. "Steady, Mercer," Talbot murmured behind him. "I'm steady," Hank whispered back. But he wasn't. They reached a narrow choke point, a pinch of stone where the tunnel squeezed to single file, width. Beyond it, the darkness looked thicker, almost liquid. Talbot nodded to Hank. "You're on point." Hank swallowed once, set his jaw, stepped through. Instantly he felt the change. The temperature dropped. The tunnel walls were wet, cold, slick. The ceiling arched lower. The air carried something metallic, blood or rust or both. His beam passed over a rotting wooden support, then over a helmet Japanese issue lying at an unnatural angle, then a whisper. Not echo, not wind. A whisper shaped like words. Hank froze. The others pressed close behind. "What is it?" Havers whispered. Hank held up one hand. "Quiet." Another whisper, slightly louder. Then something scraped across the stone floor. Talbot leaned close to Hank's ear. "They know we're here." The squad shifted, rifles aimed into the black. Suddenly a voice, a raw, rasping shout, erupted from somewhere ahead, followed by the unmistakable metallic snap of a bolt being chambered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Down!" Talbot barked. A shot cracked, muzzle flash flaring briefly in the dark like lightning trapped underground. Stone chips blasted from the wall near Hank's shoulder. The Marines returned fire, muzzle bursts strobing the tunnel interior. Flashlights jerked wildly. Shadows danced like frantic spirits. "Push forward!" Talbot yelled. "Keep moving. Don't get bottlenecked." Hank surged ahead, adrenaline swallowing fear, boots hammering the uneven floor. The enemy had ducked behind a rock shelf, firing from a cramped blind corner. They had the advantage, perfect cover, perfect angle. Hank skidded to the side, firing 2 controlled bursts, forcing the enemy soldier to withdraw deeper into the passage. The air filled with acrid smoke. The ceiling rained dust. A grenade clinked across the stone. "Greener!" The explosion slammed the tunnel, a concussive thud that sucked the air from their lungs. The walls shuddered. Hank hit the ground hard, ears ringing, dust falling like volcanic snow. Pain flared along his arm, shrapnel maybe, or stone. Talbot dragged him up. "You good?" "I think so." The squad regrouped, staggered but intact. But the explosion had done something worse than injure them. It damaged the structure. The tunnel groaned. A cascade of dirt spilled from the ceiling. "We need to move," Talbot snapped, "before this whole damn place comes down." They advanced deeper. Hank's flashlight beam caught movement, a fleeting blur disappearing around a bend. He ran after it, heart pounding. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Here, the walls were lined with old crates, some split open, spilling ammunition, rations, even rusted medical kits. It was a supply hub, and it wasn't empty. 2 Japanese soldiers crouched behind a crate stack, rifles ready. Hank fired first. Instinct, overwhelming thought. One soldier dropped, the second ducked, rolled, fired back. A bullet ricocheted off a rock and zipped past Hank's cheek like an angry hornet. Talbot and the others flooded in behind him, overwhelming the enemy with coordinated fire. Silence fell again, heavy, unnatural. But the silence didn't last. A sound deeper inside the tunnel drifted toward them, rhythmic, labored breathing. Not one person, many. Talbot's expression hardened. This wasn't just a hideout. It's a whole damn garrison in here. Hank's stomach turned cold. How many? He asked. Too many. Talbot looked at the men. We're not dying in a hole. We push through, find another exit, or make one. They moved without further hesitation. Every step took them deeper into a world that felt more forgotten, more foreign. The tunnel network branched like a web. The walls bore signs of long habitation, sleeping mats woven from palm fibers, lantern hooks, makeshift shelves. But there were no personal items, no letters, no trinkets, as if the men who lived here had stripped themselves of everything but duty. The Marines rounded another bend. A cavern opened before them, large enough to hold a dozen men. A faint light flickered from an old oil lamp, and against the far wall, a radio set. Hank's breath caught. This was the command node, and at the radio sat a lone figure, a Japanese officer, uniform torn, face gaunt, eyes dark with exhaustion yet burning with resolve. He turned slowly toward them, hands still on the radio controls. For a moment no one moved. He looked at Hank not with fear, but with an expression Hank couldn't name. Something between defiance and farewell. Then he reached for something at his side. A pistol. Talbot fired first. The officer slumped, the pistol clattering onto the stone, but his other hand still rested on the radio key. Hank stepped forward. What was he doing? Calling in something, Talbot muttered. Whether anyone's left to listen, who knows? The cavern vibrated faintly. Not from gunfire, from something deeper. A low rumble rolled through the earth. The hell was that? Havers asked. Hank's eyes widened. Cave-in? No, Talbot said grimly. That was deliberate. They rigged charges. He called the order. The rumble grew louder. The walls trembled. They're collapsing the tunnels, Talbot barked. All of them! Panic flared in the men's eyes, but discipline held. They moved, fast and focused, retracing their steps, searching desperately for branching paths that led upward, anything that could lead them out. The tunnel roared behind them like a dying beast. Stone cracked, ceilings collapsed, dust billowed, choking the air. Hurry! Talbot shouted. Hank's legs were fire, lungs burning, heart slamming. They sprinted through the dark, dodging falling debris, stumbling over uneven ground. A large boulder fell inches from Hank's boots. Another explosion echoed, closer, ripping apart the earth. Then light, faint, pale, precious. Just ahead, a collapsed shaft, but not fully blocked. A narrow gap near the top, sunlight seeping through. Up! Go! Talbot ordered. The men scrambled. Hank boosted Havers upward, then climbed, hands scraping rock, muscles screaming. He squeezed through the gap, emerging into blinding daylight. The jungle canopy towered above, alive with birds and wind, real air, open sky, salvation. One by one, the Marines burst through the opening. The tunnel behind them roared again. And then it collapsed completely, sealing itself forever. Talbot collapsed to his knees, gasping, sweat streaked with dust. Hank dropped beside him, chest heaving, every limb trembling. They had survived, but barely. Hank lay back in the dirt, eyes on the sky. The blue above looked impossibly vast. Once, far out on the Atlantic, a Liberty ship had survived the impossible, and on that night, Hank felt some invisible hand nudging him toward life. Now, standing above a buried tomb of stone, he wondered if that same luck was still with him, or if it had finally begun to run out. The wind rustled the jungle leaves. Far off, artillery rumbled. The war did not stop, and Hank knew. Their escape from the tunnels was only the beginning. The jungle swallowed them almost as quickly as the tunnel had spit them out. Sunlight shimmered through palm fronds in thin, fractured beams, painting the Marines in streaks of gold and shadow. The air smelled like life, again wet soil, leaves, distant ocean, but after what they'd crawled through, even the wind felt unreal, like some impossible luxury they hadn't earned. Sergeant Talbot pulled himself upright with a groan, dust falling from his gear in little grey clouds. "Sound off," he rasped. One by one the men answered, tired, shaken, but breathing. Hank wiped the grime from his face, smearing it into darker streaks. His ears still rang from the explosions, his lungs still felt raw, but he was alive. Somehow. Again. The jungle around them was still, too still. No distant rifles cracking, no mortar thumps, just the whisper of leaves and the slow hum of insects daring to return. "We should move," Havers said cautiously. "If they collapse the tunnel, the bastards above ground might have seen the dust cloud. They'll send patrols." He scanned the tree line, jaw tense. "We'll head south, toward our own lines. Intel says the 2nd Marine Division's been pushing in that direction." Hank frowned. "That's a long way on foot, Sarge." "Longer if we stand around debating it." No one argued. They were all too drained to resist orders, and too seasoned to expect an easier option. They started walking. The jungle canopy swallowed them deeper. Parrots shrieked somewhere overhead, their cries sharp and dissonant, a reminder that nature didn't care who owned these islands or who died trying. The ground underfoot was slick, treacherous. Sometimes the men had to carve their way through vines with bayonets, each swing testing their already screaming muscles. No one talked at first, but soldiers can't stay silent for long. Conversation keeps fear from becoming unbearable. After an hour, Havers finally spoke up. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that maybe we weren't supposed to make it out of there?" Talbot shot him a hard look. "Don't start that superstitious crap. It's not superstition, it's, I dunno." Havers rubbed the back of his neck. "Feels like we're running on borrowed luck." Hank didn't say anything. He just walked, rifle slung tight, eyes scanning the foliage. But the thought crawled into his mind anyway. Borrowed luck. First the halberd star, then the tunnel. How many times could a man cheat death before it came looking to settle accounts? He shook the thought off and kept moving. They hiked for another hour before stopping near a stream trickling between moss-covered rocks. The water was clear, cold, and blessedly drinkable. Hank scooped handfuls into his mouth, savouring the sting of it on his dry throat. Talbot crouched beside him. "You fought well down there," the sergeant said quietly. Hank blinked. Praise wasn't Talbot's language. "I just did what I had to." "Men say that," Talbot murmured. "Most don't mean it. You do." Hank wasn't sure what to say, so he said nothing. The sergeant stood, nodded once, and moved on. The silence didn't last. Suddenly the jungle ahead rustled. Every rifle snapped up. Hank dropped behind a low stump, breath locked in his chest. The foliage parted, and a Marine scout stepped out, mud-caked and exhausted. "Friendly, friendly," he called, raising his hands. Relief crashed through the squad so hard some of the men nearly collapsed. The scout waved them forward urgently. "You're alive," he said, astonished. "We saw the tunnel blow an hour ago. Thought you were done for." "We were close enough," Talbot said. "Where's the rest of your unit?" "Not far. Come on." They followed him through thick brush until voices drifted toward them, American voices. Then came the sight of helmet nets, radio antennae, and the familiar green-grey bulk of Marine equipment. A small forward operations group was dug in along a ridge, preparing for another push inland. An officer hurried over, eyes wide as he spotted the dust-covered, half-blasted remnants of Talbot's squad. "Christ almighty," he muttered. "You boys look like you clawed your way up from hell." "Close," Havers said, achieving the faintest smirk. Hell was roomier. The officer motioned them into a makeshift command tent. Inside, maps were spread across crates, marked with pencil lines and shifting boundary notes. The smell of tobacco and sweat hung heavy. "The Japanese are still dug in deeper than intel expected," the officer explained. "Caves, fortified ridges, inland guns. They're not breaking easy." Talbot pushed a hand through his hair. "We found a major node in their tunnel network. They collapsed it after we engaged." The officer cursed softly. "Means they're consolidating. Could be prepping a counterattack." Hank exchanged a look with Havers. More fighting, more tunnels, more chaos. But at least now they weren't alone. The officer noticed Hank's long, unreadable stare. "What's your name, Marine?" "Corporal Mercer, sir. You look like a man who's seen too much for one morning." Hank didn't disagree. "Still," he managed to say, "we're ready for whatever comes next." Even though the words tasted like ash, even though a part of him prayed nothing would come next, the officer gave an approving nod. But before he could say more, a radio operator burst into the tent. "Sir, enemy movement. Major force approaching from the north. Looks like they're massing." The officer's jaw tightened. "How many?" The operator swallowed. "Company strength. Maybe more." Talbot cursed under his breath. Guess that counterattack wasn't far off. The officer looked at the ragged survivors. "Can your men still fight?" Talbot didn't hesitate. "We can." The officer nodded. "Take positions on the ridge. We'll need every rifle." As the squad moved out, Hank felt a strange calm settling inside him. The kind that came when fear finally burned itself out. He checked his ammunition, tightened the straps on his pack, and took his place along a shallow trench line carved into the ridge's slope. Wind stirred the treetops. The jungle rustled like something stirring awake. Talbot knelt beside Hank. "You thinking about that ship again?" Hank blinked. "Sometimes." Talbot nodded slowly. "Makes sense. A miracle like that sticks with a man." "Feels like it's following me," Hank muttered. Talbot looked ahead at the tree line where the enemy would soon emerge. "Well," he said quietly, "let's hope it's still following you now." A tense silence settled over the ridge. Then, a faint shout in Japanese. Leaves rattled violently, the distant rhythm of boots on soil. The first enemy soldier burst from the undergrowth bayonet fixed, eyes wild. Then another, and another. A wave. The Marines opened fire. Rifles cracked, machine guns rattled. The ridge erupted in smoke and fury. Hank fired controlled bursts, each recoil jarring his bruised shoulder. Men shouted orders. Blood sprayed the leaves. The enemy kept coming disciplined, relentless, shouting battle cries that pierced the gunfire. Hank ducked as a bullet snapped past his ear. Dirt exploded inches from his boots. He fired again, throat raw from shouting warnings. To his left, Havers reloaded behind a fallen log. To his right, Talbot's machine gun spat fire into the charging mass. But the Japanese didn't falter. More poured into the clearing. Grenades arced through the air. "Down!" Hank roared. 2 explosions shook the ridge. Smoke engulfed them. Hank felt the shockwave slam through his ribs. He coughed hard, blinking through the haze. Figures lunged out of the smoke, close, too close. Bayonets flashed. Hank parried a thrust, slammed the butt of his rifle into a soldier's jaw, then fired point blank. Another enemy lunged from behind. Hank spun, barely blocking a sweeping slash. The blade nicked his sleeve, slicing cloth. Talbot tackled the attacker, saving Hank by inches. More shouts. More gunfire. The battle raged in brutal, chaotic waves. But slowly the enemy began to falter. The ridge held. The Marines pushed them back. And finally, silence. Thick, trembling silence. Talbot sank into the dirt, panting, helmet askew. Havers collapsed beside him, face streaked with soot and sweat. Hank leaned against a tree, chest heaving, rifle trembling in his hands. They had survived again, barely. But as the smoke drifted skyward and the jungle slowly reclaimed its sounds, Hank felt something strange in his chest, not relief, not triumph, something heavier. Something like the dawning realization that no miracle lasts forever. Talbot caught his eye. "You all right, Mercer?" Hank wasn't sure how to answer. He wasn't sure what he even felt, so he simply nodded. Talbot gave him a tired, almost fatherly pat on the shoulder. "Rest while you can," he said quietly. "War's not done with us yet." Hank looked out over the trees, the battlefield, the distant smoke curling into the sky. War wasn't done with them, and Hank wasn't sure his luck was, either. But one of them would run out first. Night came down over Saipan like a slow extinguishing of the world. The jungle hushed, the sky dimmed to ink, and the ridge, still reeking of gunpowder and blood, settled into an uneasy quiet. The Marines lit no fires. They spoke little. They cleaned rifles, checked bandages, sharpened bayonets, and counted ammunition with the grim precision of men who knew dawn might bring another trial. Hank sat beneath a leaning palm trunk, helmet off, canteen resting between his boots. The evening wind carried the faint scent of the sea salt and distant waves. If he closed his eyes, he could almost imagine the deck of the halberd Star beneath him again, the ocean rolling out in all directions, the horizon clean and unbroken. But the sound that came instead was the ragged breathing of exhausted men, the soft clack of someone pulling back a bolt to clear dirt from it, the occasional moan of someone dreaming nightmares they'd have to wake up and fight through again. Talbot lowered himself beside Hank. The sergeant's face looked older than it had that morning, lines cut deeper, stubble darker, eyes dimmed by something heavier than fatigue. "Barely scraped through," he muttered. "We did scrape through," Hank said. Talbot huffed a bitter half-laugh. "You always find the silver lining, Mercer." Hank shrugged. "Someone has to." Talbot didn't say anything for a while. The jungle was quiet enough that they could hear distant artillery, faint booms rolling along the horizon like slow thunder. American guns or Japanese guns, it was impossible to know. "Mercer," Talbot said suddenly, voice low. "I'm not sure the brass knows what we stirred up today." Hank frowned. "You think there's more coming?" Talbot nodded. "Not tonight, maybe, but soon. They don't blow a tunnel network unless they're rearranging their whole defense. Or protecting something," Hank added. Talbot looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Hank hesitated. A thought had been gnawing at him since the tunnel, since that officer at the radio. He wasn't calling a collapse team. That was automatic, pre-rigged. He was doing something else. Something he didn't want us to stop. Talbot frowned deeper. "You think he signaled another position?" "It felt purposeful," Hank murmured. Talbot ran a hand through his hair. "Christ, we'll notify command in the morning." But neither of them felt reassured. They tried to rest, tried to pretend that sleep was possible on a battlefield where the darkness itself seemed predatory. Hank lay back on the earth, staring up through the palm fronds. The stars above looked distant, blurred by humidity, nothing like the crisp, cold stars over the Atlantic. On the ship he had loved those nights. Peaceful nights. Nights where the ocean rocked the world to sleep and nothing threatened him except his own thoughts. He remembered leaning against the railing, journal on his lap, watching the phosphorescent wake shimmer behind them. He remembered thinking how small he was, how small the war was, in comparison to the sea. He remembered the moment the torpedo hit the explosion that should have torn him open, and how afterward he'd stared at the water, at the scarlet glow from the burning, slick, trembling, knowing he had just survived something men didn't survive. He remembered wondering why. Back then the question felt harmless. Tonight it felt heavier. He closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come. Sometime past midnight, he heard footsteps. Hank opened his eyes, hand drifting toward his rifle. But it was Havers, easing down beside him with an exhausted grunt. "You awake too?" Havers whispered. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." They sat quietly for a moment, listening to crickets and distant mortar thumps. Havers rubbed his face. You think we're making a difference out here?" Hank didn't answer immediately. He looked at the ridge, at the silhouette of Marines standing guard, at the lingering curl of smoke from the earlier firefight. "I think," Hank said slowly, "that sometimes you don't fight for the whole war. You fight for the man next to you, and you trust that someone else, somewhere, is doing the same. Havers nodded, swallowing hard. You ever feel, he said softly, like today was supposed to be it? Yeah, Hank whispered. Havers let out a shaky breath. So did I. The two men sat in silence, shoulder to shoulder, the weight of unspoken fears settling between them. Then, faintly, barely audible at first, a rustle, not wind, not animal, human. Hank stiffened. Havers heard it too. He rose slightly, hand on rifle. Another rustle. Closer. Talbot hissed from a few feet away. Positions. Quiet. Move. The entire perimeter shifted silently like a single organism. Rifles aligned toward the jungle. Shadows tensed. Breath froze. Something moved between the trees. A silhouette. Small. Unarmed. It stepped out into the moonlight. A civilian boy. Japanese. Thin. Filthy. No older than 12. Maybe 13. His hands trembled as he lifted them, eyes wide with paralyzing fear. Talbot rose from cover slowly, signaling the others to hold fire. The boy spoke in halting, desperate Japanese. Talbot looked at Hank. Mercer, you picked up some language from the merchant ship days, didn't you? A little, Hank whispered. Try. Hank stepped forward cautiously, palms open. He spoke gently, slowly, piecing together what little Japanese he knew. We won't hurt you. Are you alone? The boy shook his head violently, almost panicked. He pointed deeper into the jungle, eyes filling with tears. Hank's stomach tightened. What's there? The boy tried again, words tumbling, terrified. Hank caught fragments. Civilians, hiding, trapped, wounded. Then one word that made Hank's blood run cold. Kikan-sho. Radio station. Talbot met Hank's eyes. You understand? Hank nodded. There's more. Not just civilians. He says there's a protected site, something important, and wounded soldiers guarding it. Talbot's jaw clenched. That officer in the tunnel. He sent a distress to them. The boy tugged Hank's sleeve urgently, pleading, motioning for them to follow, no, begging. Hank knelt down slowly. Are they in danger? The boy nodded frantically. Hank stood. Sergeant, if what he's saying is right, there's a whole group out there waiting to be overrun. Talbot exhaled, rubbing his brow. Damn it, we're barely patched together ourselves. But we can't just leave them, Hank said. Talbot eyed the boy, his shaking hands, his pleading expression. Could be a trap. It could, Hank admitted. But look at him. He's terrified. For someone else. Talbot looked at his exhausted squad, then at the jungle, then finally at Hank. Gather your gear, the sergeant said. We're moving. The boy's eyes widened with relief. Hank nodded once. Let's go. They moved through the jungle cautiously, the boy leading them. He limped slightly, flinching at every snapping twig, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds to make sure the Marines still followed. The moonlight guided them in patches, breaking through the canopy in pale, ghostly fragments. The air grew colder, the night thicker. Even the insects seemed afraid to make noise. After nearly half an hour, Hank began to smell something smoke, faint but distinct. Not campfire smoke, gunpowder. The boy stopped suddenly and pointed ahead. Talbot raised a fist. Hold! They crouched behind thick foliage. Through the leaves, in a small clearing, they could see it, a shallow cave entrance, partially camouflaged. Japanese civilians huddled inside, women, elderly men, several children. A few wounded soldiers lay near the entrance, bandaged with strips of cloth, barely conscious. And surrounding the cave, a group of armed Japanese soldiers. Not many, but enough. 4, maybe 5. Standing guard, waiting. Hank whispered. They're protecting the civilians. Talbot nodded grimly. But from what? One answer arrived immediately, a distant chorus of angry shouts. Movement in the darkness behind the clearing. More Japanese soldiers, this group ragged, aggressive, shouting commands Hank didn't recognize. A different regiment, maybe cut off, maybe panicked, maybe acting on desperation. But their weapons were raised, and they were advancing on the civilians. Talbot inhaled sharply. They're going to kill them. Hank's heart clenched. We can't let that happen. Talbot grabbed Hank's sleeve. His voice was low but razor-sharp. Mercer, we intervene, we ignite a full firefight, we'll be trapped here too. I know. Talbot stared into Hank's eyes, then sighed hard. Positions. Quiet. Take the advancing group first. The Marines spread into the foliage, rifles aimed. The boy crouched behind Hank, trembling. The first of the attacking soldiers raised his rifle to fire, and Hank fired before he could. The clearing exploded in chaos. Marines surged from the dark like ghosts. Bullets cracked through leaves. The advancing soldiers dropped one by one, surprise etched into their faces. The group guarding the cave turned, confused, thinking they were under attack too. Then one shouted something. Hank caught it faintly. Protect the civilians. The Guardians didn't fire on the Marines. They fired on the attackers. Two opposing Japanese groups clashed violently, unaware or unwilling to care that Americans were the ones tipping the balance. Hank shouted to Talbot, "Push them back!" Talbot roared, orders flanking, covering fire, Titan formation. Gunfire shredded the night. Leaves flew, bodies fell. Finally silence, heavy, total. Smoke drifted upward in thin spirals. Only the civilians' soft whimpering broke the quiet. Talbot exhaled. Clear! Hank lowered his rifle slowly, chest heaving. The surviving Japanese Guardian soldiers looked at the Marines for a long, tense moment. Their expressions were unreadable: fear, gratitude, shame, exhaustion, all tangled together. One of them bowed his head faintly. Then they retreated into the jungle, wounded comrades slung, over shoulders, disappearing without a word. The civilians remained. Hank approached the cave slowly, palms open, voice soft. The boy ran to them, sobbing, reassuring them. A woman, old, frail, reached toward Hank with trembling hands. He knelt. She touched his face gently, whispering words he didn't understand. But he understood the meaning. Thank you. Hank swallowed hard, throat burning. Talbot approached, placing a hand on Hank's shoulder. We'll get them to safety, the sergeant said quietly. Hank nodded, but something inside him shook, something deep and fragile. Tonight he had saved lives. Tonight he had seen the enemy save their own. Tonight he had walked the thin, trembling line between duty and humanity, and for the first time in weeks he felt something he thought war had taken from him. Something small, something precious. Hope. The storm broke over the North Sea at noon, a heaving grey mass of wind and water that seemed determined to swallow the Liberty ship whole. Captain Alden Briggs stood on the bridge, bracing himself against the sway as sheets of rain hammered the glass. For a moment he felt the strange calm that came when nature roared louder than war ever could, when the sea became the only enemy worth fearing. But he knew better. Weather was never the worst thing out here. Not in 1943. Not when a German U-boat could be 400 feet away. Listening, waiting. Down in the engine room, Chief Mate Corwin adjusted a valve with fingers numb from cold. The entire ship felt like a lung struggling to breathe, shuddering with every swell. Steam hissed. Pipes rattled. Somewhere in the darkness overhead, boots thumped as sailors tied down cargo and lashed loose barrels. Corwin muttered to himself that the sea had a mean sense of timing. Storms always came when tension was already high. But he didn't know the half of it yet. Out beyond the violent curtain of rain, the German submarine U-1207 crept forward at periscope depth. Inside her steel belly, Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller studied the wavering silhouette on the surface. A single merchantman, isolated, lunging through the waves like a wounded animal, easy prey. The crew waited silently, breaths held, the stale air thick with oil and sweat. Müller gave the order with a simple nod. The first torpedo left the tube with a hiss, then the second. 2 white streaks racing through black water toward a ship that had no idea death was on the way. On the Liberty ship's bridge, the lookout barely had time to shout before the ocean erupted. The explosion tore a plume of fire and steel skyward. Briggs was thrown backward, hitting the floor hard. The ship lurched. Alarms shrieked. Men shouted in panic as the deck tilted under their feet. The Liberty ship shouldn't have survived the first hit. It certainly shouldn't have survived the second. But the blasts had struck forward of the boilers, rupturing compartments already reinforced with extra bracing welded in during a rushed yard refit. Luck, engineering, and timing formed a strange alliance that kept her afloat just barely. Corwin dragged himself up from the engine room floor, coughing through smoke. Gauges spun wildly. A pipe blew, spraying steam. He grabbed a wrench and shut the valve. Another sailor, Ellis, stumbled in with blood on his forehead. "We're hit!" he cried. "No kidding. Help me stabilize the damn pumps before we drown." On the U-boat, Muller expected to see the Liberty ship break apart. He expected fire, sinking, men abandoning ship into impossible seas. Instead, the vessel battered, mangled, burning refused to die. His crew stared in disbelief as the merchantman kept pushing forward, dragging itself through the storm like something stubborn and haunted. Muller ordered a third torpedo prepared. Pride demanded it. The sea demanded it. On the bridge, Briggs fought his way upright as officers shouted damage reports. "Forward compartments flooding. Bulkhead holding for now. Radios out." The list grew worse by the minute. Briggs grabbed the wheel and forced his voice steady. "We're still afloat. Engines?" A crackle came through the voice pipe. "Running, but not happy," Corwin growled. "I can give you half speed. No promises how long." That was enough. Enough to survive, maybe. But the U-boat was circling, and the storm was clearing, just enough for the grey silhouette of the submarine to break the surface close enough that men on deck could see German sailors scrambling across the casing. One of Briggs's gunners, Private Halden, shouted, "Sub off port bow." The crew rushed to man, the 3-inch deck gun. Rain blinded them, wind shoved them, but they moved with the desperation of men who had already tasted death once today and refused to swallow the rest. The U-boat's deck gun fired first. The shell whistled past the Liberty ship's bow, exploding in a shower of steel and spray. Halden fired back, the shot slamming into the submarine's conning tower with a burst of sparks. German gunners ducked, shouting. Muller ordered full dive. The submarine slid beneath the waves, but too late. Halden's second round struck the hull as it dipped, cracking metal and forcing the U-boat into an uncontrolled descent. Inside, alarms blared. Water sprayed through new seams. Muller shouted for ballast adjustment, for pumps, for anything that would stop the plunge. The crew scrambled, terrified. The sea didn't care. On the Liberty ship, men cheered, but Briggs didn't. He knew battles with submarines rarely ended cleanly. The U-boat could still fire blind torpedoes, still kill them in a final spiteful lunge. Below, Corwin struggled to keep the engines online. They thudded like dying hearts. The ship groaned with every wave, but she moved, proudly, stubbornly, as if aware that she had become something bigger than steel and rivets. A survivor. For 20 long minutes, no attack came. Then, 30. Then an hour. The storm eased. The sea calmed. When the clouds finally parted, the horizon glowed red in the distance. Corwin climbed onto the deck, exhausted, grease smeared across his face. Briggs joined him, leaning against the railing. The ship spat smoke into the sky but floated steady. "Did we beat her?" Corwin asked. Briggs exhaled. "We outlived her. Sometimes that's the same thing." Neither man ever learned the full truth that U-1207 lay crippled on the seabed, crew alive but desperate, fighting to surface again. The submarine's last memory of daylight was the impossible sight of a Liberty ship limping onward through fire and storm, as if refusing to grant the Germans even the dignity of a clean kill. Briggs set a new course towards Scotland. engines groaning in protest. Every mile felt stolen, every hour a gift. The men aboard carried the strange electric silence that follows a close brush with death, a mix of awe, fatigue, and the deep human need to laugh simply because they were still breathing. By dusk, someone brewed coffee on a dented stove. Someone else patched a torn jacket. A gun crew played cards beside their still-smoking cannon. And Captain Alden Briggs stood alone at the bow, watching the horizon, whispering a quiet thanks to a ship that should have sunk twice, but didn't. Behind him, the Liberty ship's wounded hull left a crooked wake, defiant as a scar that refused to heal. Ahead, the coastline waited. The war was far from over. But this day, this impossible day, belonged entirely to them. The smoke settled slowly over the fractured coastline, drifting like tired ghosts above the wounded sea. By dawn, the wind had shifted, carrying with it the distant thunder of naval guns, somewhere far off someone else's battle, someone else's desperate attempt to stay alive. For the first time in days, the men could actually hear the ocean without the punctuation of mortar fire. It felt unreal, like the world had forgotten to keep killing them. Corporal Henry sat on a broken ammunition crate, head bowed, fingers blackened with soot and gun grease. He hadn't spoken since the tunnel. No one pushed him. No one needed to. Every man carried some version of the same quiet weight, the kind that stayed long after the victory reports came and went. Lieutenant Ward walked the line, his steps slow, almost reverent. The boys looked at him differently now, not because he had saved them, but because he had refused to let any of them vanish quietly under the earth, buried in darkness with unanswered names. He had dragged them back into the world, inch by inch, breath by breath. That mattered more than any medal. As the sun climbed, its first clean rays caught the ragged silhouettes of the Marines bandaged, exhausted, dirt-streaked but standing, somehow still standing. "Gear up," Ward finally said, voice steady but softer than usual. "We move in 10. A few groans rose, a few weary laughs. Even Henry lifted his eyes. They knew the next miles would be no easier than the last. They knew the enemy waited beyond the ridge. Surviving together had forged a kind of unspoken oath, an understanding that as long as one man still drew breath, none of them would be left in the dark again. They fell into formation and started forward, leaving behind the shattered tunnel that had tried to swallow them. Ahead lay more danger, more uncertainty. But for the first time, the light was at their backs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.